What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about films, one of my favorite things, and the new Deadpool and Wolverine movie that I just saw last week. And I'll tell you all my insights behind it. And this is, I give spoiler alerts later in the episode, but I just want you to know, spoiler alert! Listen, if you haven't seen it and you're waiting to see it, you haven't seen any clips, you haven't seen any spoilers, don't listen to the episode yet. Go listen to a different episode of my podcast and go see the movie. I'm just letting you know, I talk all parts about the movie. I go into all details about it. And I'm letting you know this is a spoiler, so you can't get mad at me. So this is it. I give another spoiler in the episode. But after that, if you're still listening and you hear something you want to hear, it's your fault, not mine. Anyway, this episode is brought to you by, guys, guess what? Okay, I don't have an actual sponsor. No one's paying me to advertise on this, but I'm an affiliate for Opus Clips. Opus, O-P-U-S Clips. I use their software and I take my YouTube video and I paste it in their website and it gives me short form clips that I can use on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube Shorts that I'm using to drive traffic for this full episode content. So I use Opus Clips, O-P-U-S Clips. If you click on the description in this episode, you'll see a link. If you click it and you pay for a subscription, I'll get a little bit of, cheddar cheese, a little bit of jingle jangle in my pocket, a little bit of spending money. If you don't want to, that's fine too. I don't really care. But my first sponsor, but I repeat, and I will always hold this, I am not a corporate shill. I'm not a corporate shill. I'm not doing it for the money. But if I can make some money while doing it, I will. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the F Words with Gordo, the podcast where we talk about things we should talk about, but often don't. And I mean, we run all over things in this podcast. Today I'm talking about films, which is one of my favorite things to do, which is watch films, and how I watched the new movie Deadpool and Wolverine. And you know what is really fun? I had never seen the first two before this new one was coming out. So I spent some time. I watched the first one. The first one is very explicit. I mean, they're all R-rated. And I mean, I've watched a lot of R-rated movies, and I guess there's a spectrum of content they can allow in R-rated movies. The first one is by far the most explicit, which what they came out and said was their budget was pretty low. It was about $50 million on the first Deadpool movie, and they had to rely on character building, and they had to rely on, I guess, kind of like shock value a little bit. And so in the forms of jokes, in the form of content on the screen. And it was also like the pre-Disney era. And so they had a lot of, the humor is really crude and there's like a lot going on. And so the first one was fine. Out of the three movies, the first one would be like my least favorite. I'm sure there's some people out there, it's about 8 years old now, who would be really sentimental about it and would say, no, the first Deadpool's the best, which is fair. If you feel that way, like I wouldn't argue with you on it. But I just think like the budget was a little bit too low. And it was actually the storyline. Okay, pause. Spoiler alert. I'm going to fully talk about all three movies. So if you haven't seen the new one and you want to, I'm going to spoil the crap out of it. If you haven't seen the other two, even though they've been out for 6 and 8 years, I'm going to spoil those too. So this is your alert. I'm just rambling here, giving a spoiler alert. So if whatever you're listening or watching on, you have time to pause it and then get out of here. Go listen to another podcast I've done because I don't want to ruin this for you. Because I'm warning you now, I am going to talk about everything in these movies. Resume. All right, spoiler alert over. So the first one, the story was like fine. It's Deadpool's origin story and his origin story with his love interest. It was good. There's like parts about it that are super well done. Some of the characters that they pick and build into it were super fun. Some of the parts of the character were super fun. But it was like very crude. It was the most crude, and I understand crudeness. I appreciate crudeness in fair amounts, but there's just points where I was like, this is like too much for me. Like there's one scene they go into a strip club, and when it comes to nudity, I just totally like don't watch whoever's on screen, and which is like a whole topic in itself. But there's like a point where they're in the strip club, and I'm just like kind of covering my eyes, but it's like a main part of the story, and they're trying to find the antagonist. So you're like listening, and it's just kind of awkward. Anyway, and there's some sexual jokes that are like it's just like very explicitly sex jokes. Anyway, and then it's just like a pretty normal story arc. Like there's an antagonist, there's a bad guy, they make him really bad and mean, and it has pretty normal resolution where they find the bad guy, and he is done, killed, taken care of, whatever. And so it was like fine. I was like, oh, I see the appeal of this. I see why this was so popular when it came out. They made it for like 50 or 58 million, and it made $700 million, which is great. Like the fact when studios bet a small amount of money on a movie and it like just cranks out box office results, I think that's amazing. Second movie, I'm not sure what the budget was. It was higher than the first one. The second one, in my opinion, was way better on a few regards. Like one, the special effects was better. Two, the story arc was more enjoyable and like a bit more diverse with different sides. I got pretty emotional. Deadpool's, spoiler alert again, Deadpool's girlfriend dies early on. And the dynamic between the two of them, I found really emotional. I heard something once about Deadpool that someone said the reason why a movie like Deadpool is attractive these days is because of his anti-hero-ness, and how because he's more of an anti-hero, people feel they can relate to him more, and that relatability has made him really popular. And I would definitely agree with that sentiment for sure. I mean, there's times when I'm watching a superhero movie or a movie in general, I want a protagonist who's like an idealized version of something we strive to be. And then there's other times I want a protagonist who is more relatable. I think both are really powerful tools when they're used right. And there's something about his relationship with his girlfriend and just with who he is that it was really, impactful and enjoyable. And they brought in Cable in the second one, played by Josh Brolin, which Josh Brolin had a crazy 2018 because he was Cable in Deadpool and he was Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, and he came back the next year in Endgame as Thanos. So he had a crazy 2018, 2019. I don't know what he got paid. He might not even got paid much, but like the fact he was in probably the two biggest movies. I don't know if Deadpool might not have been the next highest grossing movie to Avengers Infinity War, but I feel like, I think Black Panther came out that year, and Black Panther was higher grossing and Best Picture nominated. And I mean, Deadpool, when you are an R-rated movie, you are carving yourself into a narrow niche because there's less people are able to go see it in theaters. And so it didn't make as much as Black Panther, probably wasn't as quite as like culturally impactful or recognized as Black Panther, but it was super good. I'm not even comparing it with Black Panther. I was comparing it with Avengers Infinity War and saying it was the second highest impactful movie, but that's debatable, I think, for that year. Anyway, but it was super like entrenched in society for sure. And the story and the characters they built in were actually really fun. Cable was really fun. There's a scene where Deadpool's like, I need a team, and they called the X-Force, which is making fun of X-Men because the X-Men are in the same universe as Deadpool, and there always like is this tension of Deadpool kind of wanting and kind of being recruited by X-Men, but they kind of neither want him to be a part of it, and so he makes a team called X-Force. And in this Deadpool 2, he's interviewing people to be part of his team, and they got pretty high level people to be a part of it. They got Terry Crews, they got Bill Skarsgård, who you might be listening thinking, I don't know who that is, but if you know the movie It, with the scary clown that kills children, and it came out in 2017, that was played by Bill Skarsgård, and he's actually a really good actor, and he's done like quite a few character pieces like that. And so he was one of them, and they had this guy called the Vanisher, and he's not there. You don't see him, so it seems like just this joke. Anyway, and then in their first, they're like, all right, let's go, and then there's someone called Domino who's just lucky. And he's like, that's not a superpower. And she argues it is, whatever. And so in the second movie, they go to fight this cable dude or rescue. It's about rescuing this teenage overweight mutant named Fire Fist, who's also really hilarious. He's like a teenage New Zealander. And they're like skydiving out of a plane, and everyone in the X-Force dies. Like everyone just lands and is dying except for Domino, and the Vanisher lands on power lines, and it turns out to be Brad Pitt. It's this split-second cameo with Brad Pitt, which is really fun because the Deadpool 2 was directed by Brad Pitt's old stunt double. The stunt double for him in Fight Club is now a director, and he directed Deadpool 2, which is really funny. Anyway, everyone dies except for Deadpool and for Domino, the lucky one, which is just like like a fun twist on a superhero movie when Infinity War came out, which was just this huge event in itself. And you go through the movie, and it's probably pretty standard, like arc as well. And there's a couple times like this overweight New Zealand kid who's also kind of an anti-hero, kind of antagonist, and he's like, damn, it feels good to be a gangster. And he's just like so funny. Just the parts of the movie were so funny. I think I found that movie funnier than the first one too, maybe because of the type of humor, but I thought it was really funny. Ends, teases like the next one, and then this one didn't come out for 6 years, probably because of COVID, probably because of Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox. There's like a few factors that went into it. And Deadpool 3 comes out. So there's like a bit of a lead up to it. Deadpool 3, and when Deadpool 2 finishes, he's like, I finally have a family. And he's walking with Domino, Cable, and Fire Fist, and a couple other characters. Anyway, those three specifically, they're not in the new Deadpool. I don't know why. I haven't been able to Google and see like why they're not in it, but they're not even in it. And he's like, at least I have my family. And it's like other characters. I mean, and some of them are like pretty major. Oh, and Weasel. This is really interesting too. One of the main secondary characters in the first one, second one, are this normal guy named Weasel that Deadpool knows. He's kind of comic relief, even though Deadpool's comic relief, but he's played by TJ Miller, who's a comedian. And after the second Deadpool came out, he got in some really hot water for, I'm kind of blanking because I think it must have been something sexual, honestly. And he got so big, and then he hasn't really acted in like the last 4 years. And so he's also not in the third Deadpool, unexplained, which is like, sometimes you just got to cut characters and people, but it's also sometimes as a viewer, I'm like, I wish you just like acknowledge this. Like I'm happy they don't recast. I think recasting it, there's times where it's acceptable. Like if a beloved actor passes away in the middle of a series like Dumbledore with Harry Potter, recasting makes total sense. But when there's some other reason like that behind it, then I'm like, why is this whole room shaking? Literally, my ring light is just like vibrating. I don't know if this is coming through. it feels like there's a dryer and just stops. Man, if this is coming through, it's going to be super annoying. If it's not also annoying. There's construction happening next door. And sometimes it, like, very next door. We're an old building. And so these lots are like, these buildings are right next to each other. And sometimes stuff they're doing over there comes through. Anyway, I'm just going to like let her rip. This episode, yeah, they're stopped again. Anyway, we'll just let her rip. So yeah, I really, I think recasting is so cheesy, and it makes it hard on something like Marvel, because when you have someone, like with, oh my gosh, this like bugging me so much. Anyway, when you have something like Marvel and Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man, you can start out paying them like nothing. Like Robert Downey Jr. had kind of wrecked his career before Iron Man, and he'd been in jail and different things. And so they hired him for like super cheap for what a actor of his caliber at the time should be making. But then when they become in like pillar characters for this like huge overall story that you're doing, um, they end up having so much negotiation power. So you either lock them into some kind of outrageous contract, like we're gonna get 8 movies out of you, and here's what we're paying you. But I mean, even then, they could still back out and like negotiate, or you get, like I think Robert Downey Jr. made 50 million each for Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame, which he was a major character in both. But considering the scope of the cast is pretty crazy. Anyway, and so I at the end of the day, I'd rather have that and character continuity than I would recasting. Recasting, just there's so many times, especially in the like 80s and 90s when they're pumping out sequels, maybe in 2000s, and it's just like, oh, this person who looks totally different is this character, and it's just like it doesn't work at the end of the day, unless you're just like revamping, which even this has been roasted, but like Spider-Man getting restarted multiple times and them working in this multiverse factor, which worked great, but besides that, it can be pretty cheesy. Anyway, so you get Deadpool 3. TJ Miller's not in it. Josh Brolin's not in it. Zazie Beetz, who played Domino's, not in it. The actor that played Russell's not in it. There's no explanation why. And then it goes in this totally different direction, which allows them to incorporate Wolverine, which is super fun. I really, there's something about me. Maybe it's my, slight ADHD brain, which is, I'm not just making up. I've done assessments, and it seems I do have ADHD to a light degree. And there's something about like multiversal things and randomness and something just about bringing in like characters from other movies. And it might get to the point where it doesn't work anymore. But whether it's the Avengers movies, or whether it's Spider-Man No Way Home, or whether it's Deadpool and Wolverine, I love mixing different stories, different story arcs, different characters, and I think it's done super well. And so I went in the movie. I honestly didn't have like super high expectations. I was like, which I try to never do with movies. I always try to just be like, oh, I hope I enjoy watching this. I don't have to put any label on it. I just think, I hope I enjoy watching this. And I went with my 2 buddies, and it just completely blew my expectations. They first off, the integration of Wolverine. Wolverine is just such a beloved character in the movies, even going back to like Logan in 2017 when they kind of quote unquote finished his story arc. Like, just such a good character. I remember watching the first X-Men. I think it came out when I was 11, and Hugh Jackman as Wolverine was just such a perfect casting choice. And I think he was roasted at first, but he's turned out obviously to be the only person, it seems like, that can play it. But then you're just watching, and he's going through all these Wolverine variants. They're all played by Hugh Jackman, and then he encounters one Wolverine variant played by Henry Cavill, and I was like, man, just like props to Henry Cavill, because he has gone through the ringer. He went through the ringer for Superman and everything, all that crap going on over at WB, Warner Bros. And it's like, he is Superman. He's not Superman. He is Superman. He's not Superman. And he seems like someone that does real fan service. He cares about fans. He cares about accurate portrayals of characters, whether it's Superman or The Witcher. And so it was just like, man, like and apparently he got sick because he's smoking this giant cigar, and he was like sick the next day because he inhaled so much cigar smoke. He just was sick to himself the next day. So just like, bless him that he would make this choice, cut this day into his life, and film the scene as Wolverine. And then, Deadpool goes through all these different universes with all these different Wolverines, and then he lands on the one that ends up being the Wolverine for the rest of the movie. And even the choice to pick from the Time Variance Authority, they had this actor named Matthew McFadden, who the first thing I know him from is Pride and Prejudice in 2005 with Keira Knightley. Recently, he's from Succession, which I haven't seen. And at least in Pride and Prejudice, he's Mr. Darcy. And so the whole point of Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice is he's someone who appears to be like a jerk, but ends up being a man of high character, high valor, and the best choice for someone to marry, compared to someone else in the story who's highly charismatic, but just a worthless piece of scum. And that's kind of the point of Pride and Prejudice, is you have these two people, Mr. Darcy and this other guy. And then why I'm talking about this. Anyway, the point being, so he plays Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, and he just seems kind of boring and flat. I mean, to be honest, like tall, brooding, boring, and flat. And then in this movie, he was actually just like so fun. Like, he was a really, really good character, like person to play this role. He did a really great job with it. I really enjoyed it. And then you're watching the movie, and the music choices for this movie, I have no idea what the budget was for the for the music, but the royalties they would have paid, like they used Like a Prayer by Madonna. I'm assuming, because different songs have different royalty costs. Like, I think the most expensive song that you can pay to use the rights in for a movie or something is, it's like Led Zeppelin. It's in the House School of Rock. I think it's called the Immigrant Song. I might be wrong, but it's hugely costly. And the only reason School of Rock could use it was because Richard Linklater, the director of that movie, reached out to Led Zeppelin and was like, hey, I'm making this movie about this with Jack Black. Can we just use your song royalty free? And they're like, sure. And so I'm sure for something big budget, $200 million for Deadpool, that wouldn't be the case. And so they had an AC/DC song. They had Like a Prayer by Madonna, and they just all this classic 80s, 90s songs that came in for it. And these would all be songs that the royalties must have been super high. And so that's also fun. And they're using these songs in montages in different ways that they haven't really used in Marvel before. Like for one of the main action sequences, it's Like a Prayer from Madonna. And you would probably think that doesn't seem like it'd be a good montage song. And that fight scene was like really, really well done, like amazingly well done. And then you get to this point in the story. And the crazy thing about Deadpool, and I know this is kind of the point of the comics, is they always break the fourth wall. If you've heard that term, you know what that means. This is what the fourth wall is. Picture you're watching a play and you're sitting in the crowd and you're looking at the stage, watching these people act. And the actors on the stage, there's four walls. There's the wall behind them. There's the wall to their left, the wall to the right, and the fourth wall is between them and the audience. And so when someone looks, when we were watching a movie or a show and someone looks at the camera and talks to you like an audience member. That's called breaking the fourth wall. And you can't do it all the time. Like there's all these things. There's all these like literary, or I don't know what the equivalent of literary would be with movies, but there's all these like film tools, literary tools that you have to be careful how you use. You either have to like underutilize them or you overutilize them to a degree that makes them impactful. If you do it too much, then it's not going to have a effect, or it's going to be cheesy or whatever. Now, so Deadpool's always doing that. And then they're making jokes about 20th Century Fox being acquired by Disney and what that means. And with Henry Cavill, this is hilarious. Deadpool says, we'll treat you so much better than the blankety Blakes down the street, referring to Warner Bros. And how he's treated as Superman. I just love that. I don't know what it is I love about that. I think I love when, again, I don't want this to happen all the time. I don't want Avengers Doomsday in 2 years to be breaking the fourth wall all the time. It doesn't always work. But when it does, I find it really great. Because I think sometimes studios and movies and shows treat the audience stupid. Like that, I think that's what gets me out recasting. I'm so sorry. I regret eating that. Okay. The reason why I don't like recasting is because I feel like the studio thinks we're dumb. Like these people won't even know. Obviously they know we'll know. But that's how it feels as an audience member when they recast something. Or, that's what felt dumb. Mind you, going from Tobey Maguire to Andrew Garfield, 5 years from Spider-Man 3 to Amazing Spider-Man. And then I believe from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 until Spider-Man Homecoming, 3 years in between, which isn't that long. And I mean, Batman, Batman's had a lot of recasts, and for some reason we're all okay with it because they all do a pretty good job. Anyway, but that's how it feels. It feels like a studio saying, like, you guys are so dumb, you're never going to notice that this is new or different, a different person. And it's just like, yes, we will. We're not dumb. And so when you come into Deadpool and they're making fun of how Warner Bros. Treated Henry Cavill, and Henry Cavill's actually in this movie, amazing. When you have, they get I can't remember the term is, but Wolverine and Deadpool both get zapped in the time variance authority. Pruned, they called it. And then they're in this like wasteland, and there's a 20th Century Fox logo. It's so funny. And then they're in this zone. They have this crazy fight sequence. They had so many fight sequences, like it was insane. And then Chris Evans is there. Chris Evans played Captain America, and this can be confusing, but the one studio had the rights for Spider-Man. Another studio had the rights for Hulk. I'll explain that. That's why there's never been a Hulk movie since 2008, is because I believe Paramount owns the licensing rights for the movies, but somehow Marvel still kept the ability to have him in their movies, which is why there hasn't been a Hulk movie since 2008, is because I think Paramount owns the rights. Spider-Man is owned by Sony, and then the rights for X-Men, Deadpool, and Fantastic Four were owned by 20th Century Fox. And so you had one studio doing Spider-Man. You had another one doing like Blade, and I think they did Daredevil. And then you had another studio doing X-Men and Fantastic Four and Deadpool. But when Disney bought 20th Century Fox, they basically acquired all the rights for those characters again. They don't own Sony. So anytime there's a Spider-Man movie now that Marvel is producing, like the last three, or having him in with Avengers, it's because Sony has like licensed back the rights for Spider-Man. And it's tough. Like No Way Home almost didn't happen for Spider-Man because they couldn't agree to profit sharing on the movie. Like there was one point where apparently Sony wanted Disney to put in 95% of the budget, but Sony wanted to keep 95% of the profits. Just doesn't make any sense. So the fact they're doing this great for fans, great for everything. And then Deadpool's just poking fun at it the whole time. Chris Evans shows up. And then Deadpool starts making jokes about Avengers and like Cap is here. It's Captain America. And then it looks like he's Captain America. He sounds like Captain America. And then he says, "Flame on," which is his character. He played the Human Torch in Fantastic Four in the 2000s. And you're like, whoa. So he's reprising this character after 17 years. He's playing Johnny, whatever. I don't know what his last name was. Fantastic Four. And just was like such a shock. And they had different characters who are reprising their X-Men characters from the 2000s. Like this guy is playing this guy named Pyro. The actor for Sabretooth from the year 2000 is playing Sabretooth. Just crazy stuff that they would have had to go into the trenches to find these people. Who knows if these people were like, you want me in this movie? You got to pay me a huge number. And maybe that's why some people weren't in it. But the fact they worked in as many characters as they did, and the fact that Chris Evans, everyone sitting there is thinking, this is Captain America. Because Captain America is in the same universe as Deadpool, Fantastic Four, X-Men. But the movie rights were owned by different companies. It makes a big difference. Anyway, and then he's just such a turd. He's just like, and it's just like crazy because you're looking and you're like, I know this is a Human Torch, but he also played Captain America, and he has a pretty quick blip. You keep watching the movie, you meet the antagonist in Deadpool Wolverine, and then they meet them, and then they basically run away. And Ryan Reynolds is playing multiple variants for Deadpool. Like he plays this Deadpool with a man bun and long hair and good looks. He's called Nice Pool. And he has a minivan in this wasteland that he lends to Wolverine and Deadpool. And it has one of those coexist stickers on the back. And anyway, there's another great fight scene in that minivan. And then they encounter more characters. They encounter Jennifer Garner as Elektra. She hasn't played Elektra in, I think at that point, it would have been like 19 years. They encounter Wesley Snipes' Blade, who hasn't played Blade since 2006. And Marvel's been trying to redo Blade recently, and they haven't been able to get the movie right. So they have the actor lined up, but they are having a hard time getting it going. And then they had Channing Tatum as Gambit, which is crazy because I think for like 15 years, they've been talking about rumors of Channing Tatum being Gambit in a Gambit movie or whatever, and it's never happened. And they worked him into this movie. And I just think like it's just so good for fans. And there might be some fans getting fatigued from this kind of stuff, which is fair. But I think for me, when you haven't seen a character for so many years and they're willing to reprise it. Two, the studio's willing to like pay someone to come back and do that. It's just like it feels like they're honoring the intelligence of the audience, because like I think there's ebbs and flows to the movie industry and television, and there's times where they think they act like the audience is stupid. There's other times they act like they're smart. And I think when you act like an audience is stupid, you can't put a huge amount of money into a movie like that, because the audience is going to know, the market reacts accordingly. But if you put like a high degree of intention into a movie that is respecting the intelligence of the audience, it will always pay off, because it pays off sooner or later. There's movies that it takes years or a couple decades for the audience to come back and say, no, we were wrong on that. That was actually great. Case in point, Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker. Dude was roasted in the 2000s. He was like, everyone's like, this guy sucks. This guy's Darth Vader. This is awful. This is brutal. And you watch those Star Wars movies and you're like, what are they doing to my beautiful boy? Right? Like it was brutal. And then, dude, the newer Star Wars movies come out. Everyone's like, those ones weren't so bad. And then you go back and rewatch them and you see the story arc and you're like, wow, dude, he had enormous boots to fill playing Darth Vader. And when you look at what he did, you're like, wow, that's actually quite good. Like Hayden Christensen did quite good. And it's kind of the same for some of these movies. Not every X-Men movie is great. The Fantastic Four movies were not great. But it's like Chris Evans is willing to come back. The dude that played Mr. Fantastic came out when Deadpool came out. They came out. He was like approached by the media and they said, would you ever come back? And he's like, I would love to come back. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, that's what you would hope, I think, actors would do. If they move on to stuff and they don't want to come back, I think it's understandable. If they're just like, I'm a different person, I'm not interested in playing that character, understandable. However, if they want to make cameos coming back, I think it's just always great. And it makes it feel like the studio is looking at me and saying like, hey, here you go. Like, here's something nice we did for you. We didn't have to do this, but we did do this. And I think that's just stuff that always came out great in Deadpool and Wolverine. Like bringing back Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman is just so jacked. It's just like crazy. As a mid-50s, you're just like, how it's just so much discipline to get that jacked. And you had the music they used, like the rights they would have had to pay for the music was just a lot that they invested. All of these cameos and all these people they put in it, those were huge investments. And it just feels like they all paid off. The jokes were all, I mean, they don't all hit 100%, but there was a really funny movie. There's little jokes, quick jokes, long jokes, fast, slower jokes. And just was like really good. The antagonist, I thought the antagonist was really, the antagonist was really intimidating. Like that's something that doesn't always happen, especially in all these superhero movies. Like there's one point that Deadpool says, because the Matthew McFadden guy says, we have a Time Ripper. Time Ripper is a new machine that deletes unusable timelines at record rates. And Deadpool goes, what in the MacGuffin? Which was so funny because a MacGuffin is a literary or I wish I knew the word for film that's like literary. It's a tool when there's not really, it means like there's an antagonist or a device, or it's a plot device, which is what it is. It's a plot device to finish like the plot arc and plot development that doesn't mean anything. You know, it's like, oh, there's this blank weapon that's going to do blank that we have to stop before it does blank. And, but they called it out. They're like, what in the MacGuffin? It was a MacGuffin. And, which I really like appreciated. And, you know, they go through and then there's one point where Blade, played by Wesley Snipes, he's like fighting or he's riding. He's like, there's only one Blade. There's only ever gonna be one Blade, which is hilarious because they've already recast Blade and they're redoing Blade. But again, it's just like the actor was willing to say it. The studio is willing to put it out there, which was just really like, thank you for, man, I'm talking about this a lot. Thank you for acting like I'm not dumb, finally. That's what it felt like. You know, almost like you guys are the dumb ones for recasting this and thinking like, we're just going to fully accept it. Like you kind of have to earn our respect with these recasts and stuff. And then the action was great. Some of the fight scenes between Deadpool and Wolverine were just like, and this is something, it makes so much sense when you watch X-Men in 2000s. You don't really think much about this, the rating and the type of violence. But you look at a character like Wolverine. He's got knives that come out of the front of his hands, and he's just cutting people. And when Logan came out in 2017, and some of the violence was at the caliber that it was in that movie, it made you realize, like, holy, how did they make Wolverine in movies without an R rating before? Because this guy has knives on his hands. He's just going to be chopping off limbs and heads and you got to think the violence is pretty gory in those fights. And that an R rating makes the most sense for someone like Wolverine. And it kind of comes out in this movie too. You're like, wow. And swearing, like someone as angry or as like at the type of character that Wolverine is obviously gonna swear. So just those things that kind of make you feel like, oh yeah, I understand this more. I respect this more. that was really fun. And then, you get to the end and there's just parts that are pretty emotional about it too. There's a point where Wolverine pulls his hood. It's called a cowl. I don't know exactly why, but it's like a superhero hood that leaves the mouth open. And he pulls it over onto his head at kind of the last third or last quarter of the movie, which was like a comic accurate suit, and you kind of look back in hindsight at some of these movies and the first X-Men movies where they kind of have black leather uniforms, and there's times, like a good comparison would be X-Men in the 2000s and Spider-Man. Spider-Man, comic accurate suit. The web shooter would not be comic accurate because he just has it in his wrist, and he's like, when he's bitten by the spider, he's bitten by the spider and he's able to create his own web. Anyway, that's like such a minor thing I'm gonna try to focus on. The suits, you have X-Men, which were not comic accurate, and then you had Spider-Man, which were comic accurate, and you have these two kind of things where I think they're trying to figure out essentially, and this is like a pretty important topic for me too, but when you're translating books, comic books, even TV shows into movies, the medium is such an important consideration when you are creating what you're creating, because you can't necessarily just translate across. It doesn't always hit. There's sometimes they try direct translations from books into movies, in terms of plots, in terms of characters, in terms of costumes, and it's cheesy. And there's other times they don't translate it, and they change the plot, they change the character, they change costumes, whatever, and you're like, oh, but this is too far gone. This is not close enough. And so this would be the most comic accurate Wolverine in terms of suit, especially when that cowl came over. It was like, man, I just felt like I was watching the X-Men cartoon from when I was a kid. It was just cartoon accurate. And I just appreciated that they're willing to do that. It's Hugh Jackman's 24th year playing Wolverine, and he was willing to go along with that. It's just, yeah, it's just like a great progression for that character. And, who knows if he'll keep playing. Like, I have no idea what kind of contract they signed him to. It seems like he still enjoys playing the character. But, yeah, it was just like a really great, the humor hit, the cameos all hit, the music hit, acting. I mean, something I think when you're watching a comic book movie is like, I think you have to like be able to appreciate that this isn't necessarily going to be it's not going to be the highest quality in every single regard in terms of, CGI, in terms of character development, in terms of costumes, in terms of plot development, in terms of, I don't know, just overall watchability, in terms of jokes. It's a comic book movie, and you kind of have to go back again to like, why am I watching this movie right now? What is this doing for me? There's times, like I said earlier, there's times where I want to watch something that has a relatable character who I can identify with. And there's other times I want to watch things that have idealized characters, that have, characters with extreme characteristics that are supposed to help us maybe look up to something and idealized versions of ourselves. I mean, a good contrast would be Superman to Deadpool. And Superman is such a highly idolized character, like inhumanly strong. He can fly, inhumanly fast. He's not even human. He's an alien. But it allows you to kind of look up and say, well, there's character parts that I want to embody, or we should be embodying as humanity. But it's just kind of depends on what you're watching, what it's being translated from, what the budget was, and everything. Actually, I really appreciate that Ryan Reynolds through the media tour for Deadpool Wolverine has been able to kind of contrast Deadpool 1 and this would be Deadpool 3 because there are a lot of stark differences. Like, and it just, the scope goes from so narrow to so wide. Deadpool 1, basically Deadpool's origin story and his revenge journey of the person who made him look like, I can't even say what he looks like because the jokes they make about what he looks like are too explicit, but he looks like trash. Like his skin is all crazy, like messed up. And it's basically just like him trying to get revenge and him trying to get his girl back and him getting a girl in the first place. Like pretty simplified plots. But he said our budget was so tight and our liberty was so small from the studio that we really had to focus on what would make us the most traction with the audience. And it's like, dude, like, thank you for saying that. Like, because even though I would say Deadpool 1 would be my third favorite out of the three of them, it was still like a great movie considering the rating, considering the budget, considering the production hell it was in to get done. And so the fact that they were able to do that, and you can contrast that, like you can contrast out the new one and you can compare and appreciate both. Because I think like sometimes it does come down to context. Like you look at the context, whether it's a book, whether it's a life situation, whether it's a movie, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, and you have to contextualize. Context just means so much. And it just kind of helps. And so then you're looking forward as a fan, you're looking ahead and you're wondering like, is Deadpool going to be in more stuff? They teased at one point a scene with Thor, like really briefly in a different timeline. And I actually didn't catch if it was Chris Hemsworth or not, but there is a question. Is that an arc that's going to close at some point in this current phase of Marvel that we're in? And there's only one way to find out. You got to keep watching, but you kind of hope they do. You kind of hope all the actors stay humble enough where they don't ask for so much money that the studio can't afford to make these movies. And you also hope, and the point that Marvel's at right now, they quadrupled down on their story arc. It was going to be Kang the Conqueror, this multiverse conquering being from the future that had all these variants. And they doubled down on one actor, quadrupled down on this one actor. Can't remember his name right now. The one actor who's playing him. And this is going to be the bad guy, Jonathan Majors. Jonathan Majors playing him. Then he had these like accusations of violence come out against him that he was found guilty of. And so he's like, you're fired. Because Marvel being owned by Disney, they do have apparently pretty high standards and contractual standards over like public persona, So they quadrupled down. And what's like so ironic, they quadrupled down on this character and then they don't, and it's so funny because they don't allow variations of him to be played by other people, which would be the easiest out. And again, here's the issue with that though. They cast Jonathan Majors. They're pumping him. Jonathan Majors is Kang. Jonathan Majors is Kang. You first see him in Loki season 1. Jonathan Majors is Kang. He comes out in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And you're like, okay, they're really building up to this. And they have to fire him. And the great thing about the multiverse is you can get multiple actors playing multiple characters. The great thing and here's where we're going to run into the issue of this could be overdone. Like if you get too many actors and you do it too often, then us as the audience are going to be like, what? Now I have to follow this person playing that character. When you don't do it too much and you focus on specific actors or characters in certain forms, it's okay. Like kind of like the reason why I worked with the Spider-Man movie is because each Spider-Man had portrayed Spider-Man at least 2 times. Like there had been some entrenchment there that when they all came back for that movie, you were wowed. Like, wow, Tobey Maguire played Spider-Man 3 times. He's back. Andrew Garfield played him twice. And this is another great example of something that was really panned by critics and the audience when it came out. Amazing Spider-Man was not well received. But then it just in hindsight, and I think out of appreciation for Andrew Garfield as a human, the audience is like, no, we actually love that. And the fact he came back, the audience like loved that he came back for that movie. But if you, the issue with Kang, they're portraying Kang with one actor. And then in Loki, I think Ant-Man, at the end credit scene of Ant-Man, they have a scene where there's a bunch of Kang variants, and they're all portrayed by Jonathan Majors in different forms and formats. And it's like, guys, you had like, if you're focusing, they called it the multiverse saga. If you're like really quadrupling down on this multiverse concept for your next phase, you probably need to pick an antagonist where you're going to have a couple main variants, a couple main actors portraying variants of them. Like the fact you doubled down on this Jonathan Majors guy, and he's going to have variants of himself, but he's playing all the variants. At the end of the day, it just is a risk. I mean, like they've hired Robert Downey Jr. to come back, and he's going to portray Doctor Doom. And I mean, like at some level, they have to be hoping like, geez, I hope Robert Downey Jr. doesn't do anything to tarnish his public perception and ruin the viability of this storyline. I mean, I think also too, the place I'm at with this Marvel stuff is the Infinity Saga, which goes from Iron Man 1 to Avengers Endgame. And maybe Spider-Man No Way Home. No, Spider-Man Far From Home, which wasn't really a good movie. But you had this 18 or 19 movie arc with all these different stories that culminated in this one finale of Avengers Endgame. I mean, it's really two-parter, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And nothing like that has been done before. Nothing like that has been... Actually, the Hulk was recast. Technically, they recast Edward Norton with Mark Ruffalo, and they just acted like it was the same guy. I kind of forgot about that. But they finished this whole thing, and I think afterwards, all the fans were like, what's next? It was 11 years and 18 movies. And then all this crap has kind of happened with the multiverse saga and Kang and bringing back Robert Downey Jr. And it has kind of made me go step back and think, was that just a unicorn? Like, what's the actual viability of this Marvel thing continuing or growing, and doing everything well, or doing everything at least good enough to get the same emotional response and wow response that the audience gave with Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame? It's hard. It's kind of a slow burn because you have to build some kind of sentimental like encroachment or sentimental like feeling for the audience with characters to bring them together and make it feel like a big deal. Because this is the hard thing too. When you're bringing big characters together all the time, then it's just not going to feel like special. And so I think you kind of have to have these breaks. And they honestly like, and this is like an economic concept. They have to, I think, be a bit more realistic in terms of how often can we pump out Avengers movies? How often can we have these large overarching story arcs? And how can we like honor the audience? Honestly, they probably have to, like after Endgame or something, like ending a major Marvel thing, they should probably take a break for a couple of years and be like the no Marvel movie for 24 months after we close the arc. And then just come back with a couple TV shows focusing on singular characters. Because I think when you bring them back, you want it to feel special and notable. Like this doesn't happen every 3 years. This doesn't happen every 2 years. This happens every 10 years or something like that. Because otherwise, I think the market and the audience will get fatigued. And you have something like Deadpool. Unfortunately, people love Hugh Jackman. People love Ryan Reynolds. And the fans are just coming out in droves for it. But easily could have just been like Marvel fatigue. Actually, Marvel hasn't released. I think this is the only movie coming out this year for Marvel, which I think is good. Like they ramped up to 3 movies a year at one point, and in hindsight, it was probably like too much. and too much too fast with all the shows and stuff too. But I mean, hey, I'm not running the studio. Like, they can do whatever they want. Like, it doesn't matter to me at all. I'm still going to pay to go to most of the stuff if it seems like it's good to go to. And I want the right guys too. The friends I went with, like, we all found all the jokes funny. We all appreciated the cameos. We all appreciated the throwbacks. And I think, man, that can be such a huge thing. Sometimes I love going to movies on my own. If you have never gone to a movie on your own, here's my challenge for you this episode. Pick a movie and go to the theater by yourself. Just by yourself. If you're married and have a family, or you're single, just go by yourself. Go and get a little bag of popcorn, sneak some snacks in, whatever you like to do, and go to a movie by yourself. It's really fun. You don't have small talk you have to make with someone. You don't have someone else's viewing preferences you have to, worry about or consider. It's just like you just get to go by yourself. It's pretty therapeutic, I would say. And having said that, I went with a couple friends and we had a great time. It was a great movie. We had a great time. Great job. Really fun evening. Really fun movie viewing experience. And at the end of the day, I just hope as they're coming out with more, I don't like saying content. I think it was Christopher Nolan really denounced the term content creation because it commoditized art creation, because content is really, typically content is something being created that people want to get rich from, and people want to get rich from movies, but you still have this intersection of economic viability and artistic viability. And when one overshoots the other, typically it doesn't fully work. It's like the first Deadpool, because when you say they made it for $50 million, it's not that much money. It's not in some regards. It is in others. And to consider a $50 million movie like an art house project is a little ridiculous, but also kind of valid. And and I think it's just like you have to maximize both. And you could probably put I like the idea of like a 3-legged stool, because when you take away one of the legs, the stool always tips over. And I think when I look at something like the Marvel movies and series, like the Marvel universe, cinematic universe, you have to have a good monetary investment and economic possibility. It has to make money to keep making more. You have to have artistic expression, and especially in like throwing back to comics and stuff, or like representing comics, you have to have artistic representation done authentically, and you have to respect the audience too, because both of those, economic viability, artistic viability, can both disrespect the audience. I think, if you're too artistic, the audience will be like, this doesn't make any sense. What is this crap? If you're too economically motivated, then again, you get into this recast thing where they made some money off a movie. They want to pump out a sequel to make a bit more money to keep it financially viable. They're not bringing back an actor who said they wanted too much. And, The Matrix did it too. That was really annoying what happened in The Matrix. And then you're left as the audience thinking like, that's Tank. That's Tank from the first Matrix. Tank was one of my favorite characters, and now it's a different person. And there's like lots of reasons that can go into that, like why they recast. Oh, and it happened with Iron Man's buddy, Rudy, War Machine. Anyway, but it at the end of the day, you have to have those three all working in tandem. And sometimes you get movies that are minimally like financially or economically invested, and they really resonate with the audience. But usually there's a minimum like point of like, there's a minimum price to pay to get that audience response. And because if you make a movie with minimal, like all those things that made Deadpool 1 attractive to the audience, like crude humor and relatable main character and love story, but the CGI was absolute trash, then it wouldn't have resonated. Like the CGI, there's a minimum standard the CGI and the special effects are going to have to meet. There's a minimum standard of comic book authentic representation you're going to have to meet, and in order to really like bring in the audience. I mean, I saw a movie the other day, and it was from 1995, theatrically released movie, and the CGI was so horrendous. I was shocked because I mean, I've watched movies from the 80s and 90s, not all the time, but enough where you kind of expect some special effects to not land. And actually, in this movie, only came out a couple years before, like The Matrix or Star Wars: Phantom Menace. But the graphics were so bad. The CGI was so bad. I was like, who let this movie out with these graphics? This is crazy. Anyway, and so that's what watching Deadpool was like. I was like so happy as a fan, as an audience member, and as someone with a sense of humor. It just hit on everything. And there's just something when you see someone like Wolverine. I haven't watched the first X-Men in years, but there's just something where you go like, oh, Hugh Jackman's back as Wolverine. That's really nice. That was just awesome. And it just extended through all these cameos and stuff and Blade and whatever. So yeah, 10 out of 10. I have like a funny movie ranking. Like some people be like, that'd never be a 10, or they're really tough at giving out 10s for movies, or with like books. They're like, I would never give out like a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. And I'm pretty liberal. It would have to be something would have to detract it enough to not let me give out a 10 out of 10. But if I enjoy it, if the movie doesn't drag, it feels like it was too fast, if I have an emotional connection, there's all these things that make it a pretty quick 10 out of 10 for me. So I really enjoyed it. I hope they integrate Wolverine and Deadpool in future Marvel movies. I don't really care if they make another Deadpool movie, but I hope, and it seems like they will be a part of this like saga they're in with Marvel. Yeah, it's always the best when it's a surprise. I don't know how they can keep things a surprise, but it's always the best when something is a surprise that you're like, oh, I didn't know this character's going to be in this movie. So I hope that they're able to keep that up. Anyway, that was Deadpool and Wolverine. That was my 2 cents on it. And if you guys see it, reach out to me, message me, let me know what you thought. For an R-rated movie, it was more palatable than Deadpool 1 or other R-rated movies. But if you're used to like a PG-13 viewing experience for movies, then this one might be hard to watch. And I kind of go through waves too, like this, in terms of my ability to watch, more explicit, violent content. Like I kind of go through waves where I feel highly sensitized to it, and I'm like, too much violence, too much swearing, and I kind of need to like abstain from it, or just, I just need a break. And there's other times where I'm like, because it's like, man, if there's a character with knives on his hands, obviously it's going to be super violent if that person gets in a fight with someone. Obviously, adults swear. Like there's things that are just like, this is humanity, and I'm okay like viewing these things in movies and shows. And there's other times I'm just like, it kind of goes back to like realism and idealism. And there's other times I'm like, I don't want to view this or whatever. But I thought it was very mild. I mean, some people are really sensitive to like swearing. I would say I'm not super sensitive to swearing, but there's a fair amount of swearing. And so you have to be comfortable maybe viewing that. But yeah, let me know what you think if you go see it. Let me know if you like all the cameos, if you like the fourth wall breaking, if you want to see these characters in future movies, or if you're like, nah, it wasn't for me, it sucked, I hated it. Yeah, let me know what you guys think. Anyway, anyway, thanks for listening. Love you guys. Catch you on the next episode. Audience member, thanks so much to watching or listening this episode. And the fact, if you're still listening, that you hung out for the whole episode, listen to me ramble about Deadpool and Wolverine. Hey, I appreciate it so much. Love you so much. I know I did that little bit of an ad in the intro, and I want to respect. Maybe you don't like that kind of stuff, but I just got to make, I got a future to look out for, and I'm just trying to make a little bit of money, a little bit of living with my podcast. So hopefully it didn't rub you the wrong way or anything. And if you did, I'm still going to do ads in the future if I can make some money with it. So, but this is what I promise. I promise I will never do an ad just because they give me money. I'll only do ads for things I actually use. That's a Gordo. That's a Gordo guarantee. All right. So anyway, thanks for listening, guys. This is on Spotify, YouTube. I'm coming out with some services soon. And just stay in touch. Love you guys. Have a good one.